Selectmen's meeting for Tuesday, February 14th. It's Valentine's Day, and here we are. Some announcements. We're still in the cart selection period for the town's hybrid pay-as-you-throw program, where we're asking people to select a cart size for if you're on town trash collection. The default size is 35 gallons, which is half the size of the large recycling bin, the blue bins. And if you don't do anything, that's what you're going to get. So that's the default size. And then your other choices are 65 gallons and 95 gallons. If you select the 35-gallon size, your annual trash fee will actually go down, and if you choose the 65, it goes up to $252 a year. And the 95-gallon size goes up to $312 a year. So the incentive is to try and do the 35-gallon size. And then if you need more capacity on a particular week, there'll be bags available at local retailers at $15 for a roll of 5. You can also apply for an exemption from the cart requirement, and then you would just use bags. But the exemptions are being carefully examined. Due to physical disability, unable to move a cart or the geography. But I don't think the exceptions will be unreasonably denied. So you can go to the town website, or you can also call the Department of Public Works at 730-2156. And your deadline is March 10th. Any other announcements?
I have an announcement. The Commission for Women is running their annual A Woman Who Inspires Me essay contest.
Yes.
This is the 25th year they've done it, and it's open to 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders who live in Brookline or who attend a public, a private, or parochial school in town. The entries are due on the 27th of this month, so just under 2 weeks from today, and they can be submitted to Casey Hatchett at chatchett@brooklinema.gov. There's more information about the contest on the Brookline Commission for Women's webpage on the town's broader web portal, and I believe there's some information on Facebook as well. But a great contest, and award winners will be honored in March, at the end of March 23rd, at an event in Honeyman Hall.
Any other announcements? Okay, then
We should just note that we are not meeting next week.
Yes, how can I forget
School
that?
Vacation week and vacation week for us as well.
Right. Okay, so let's move on. We have two quick items on our miscellaneous calendar. The first is the approval of the minutes for February 7th. I have a couple of minor.
I had some edits as well.
I did have some edits.
Okay.
I've already given my edits to them.
Okay. So I'll move that we approve the minutes for February 7th as amended. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. And the second and last item on our miscellaneous calendar is the question of granting a temporary wine and malt beverage license to Olive Connection for a cooking class being held on Thursday, March 9th from 6 to 8 p.m. at 1426 Beacon Street. I've looked at the application, and it appears an order in the police department has approved it. So I'm going to move that we approve this temporary license. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Next item is a National Grid gas line leak pilot. And it's a question of approval of participation of a pilot program conducted by National Grid to test and correct certain gas line leaks in the public way. Selectman Heller?
Yes, thank you. So this item is something, this idea has come up, has been proposed to us recently. I was in conversation with Kathleen Scanlon, who is a member of Selectmen's Climate Action Committee, and she'd been in contact with Audrey Schulman of HEAT. And Audrey had learned about this pilot program that National Grid was beginning to engage in. In fact, they've already apparently selected Newton as one of the communities that they will use for this study. So we were interested in being part of it because we do have the second highest number of gas leaks in the state, and we're anxious to get them fixed. This study basically will, National Grid will select a certain number, and the number is under discussion. I think it's anywhere between 10 and 14 at this point. And they will select what they call super emitters, that is what they think are the most severe gas leaks, and they will attempt to measure, they will measure those first using a new method by a company called Columbia Gas. And once they've tested it, then they will, HEAT, which is a Cambridge nonprofit, will go in and verify the testing or measure it themselves. National Grid will repair the leak. Then National Grid will measure, and HEAT will do an independent verification. Audrey's just coming in. So it's basically it's a great program for us because we get some of the worst, we hope, leaks repaired. And we hope that this method that Columbia Gas has developed will work to identify leaks in a simpler way. And that would mean that the utilities would perhaps, we hope, fix the leaks more expeditiously. So there are a couple of conditions. You'll see in the letter, you got one at your place, a draft letter to Amy Smith, who is the Director of Gas Pipeline Safety and Compliance for National Grid. And essentially, the first part of the letter describes the program, and then on the second page, you'll see there are 3 bullets, 1, 2, 3. So the town is going to, and I've discussed this, by the way, with Peter Ditto and also with Jonathan Simpson in Town Council's office. So the town will provide an expedited permitting process and scheduling of notice of police details, as well as work to remove any reasonable barriers to the study. Peter didn't think that would be a problem. National Grid is to perform the study, including measurements before and after the repairs. They will repair selected leaks and will absorb all costs associated with the permitting and the police details. And HEAT will absorb the cost of its independent verification both before and after the repairs. So it's really, very little cost to us, like none really. It's just a matter of Peter's office processing the permitting paperwork and the police processing the detailed information, and those, as I say, will be paid for by National Grid. So I think it's a good deal. I'd like to ask Audrey Schulman, introduce her to you. Audrey, could you come to the podium, the mic there? Audrey has come to present information to Selectmen's Climate Action Committee in the past. I think you may have also been here in the past at this meeting, but at any rate,
Yeah.
Did you have anything to add?
No, so the worst, I'm sorry for being a few minutes late. Traffic was horrible.
Oh, horrible.
The worst, just 7% of the leaks are supposed to emit 50% of the gas. So by fixing the worst leaks, you're reducing the cost to the ratepayer and reducing emissions quite a bit. So finding and fixing these leaks is something that's worthwhile.
I should point out one other thing, and that is that National Grid has requested that two researchers who had worked on the lawsuit that the town is a part of not be measuring the data, not be used by heat to measure on an independent basis the data that they received. And heat has agreed to that and will engage other independent consultants to do that work.
Just one note, Town Council has asked that we do the authorization to sign this contingent on checking with outside counsel on that lawsuit. So the vote I'm going to offer is going to be the contingent vote. Selectman Daley.
Yeah. I would like to call to your attention and to Mr. Ditto's. In the course of working on the ninth school at Baldwin, the neighbors told us that one of the issues in the area is at the Hammond Heath intersection. There is a chronic gas leak, and the gas company has repeatedly gone out there to fix it, but it never seems to get fixed permanently. And they say that there is very often a smell of gas in that area. And I know you're approaching this from a climate perspective. I'm also concerned from a safety perspective. We're going to have a lot of construction in that area, and later, school children in that area. So from the climate point of view, as well as other health considerations, I think it's very important that we would direct their attention to that be one of the areas if we did get selected. And even if we didn't get selected, I would like us to start working with the gas company to see if that can be permanently rectified so it's not an ongoing issue at that site.
Let me ask Audrey, is there a way for us to know whether that area has one of the super emitters or not?
Yeah, so you could ask that, and if it is not a super emitter, you could ask if they could look at that in terms of safety, because having school kids there as well as construction is a possible safety risk. And if you make the ask through the fire chief, that generally carries more weight.
Okay.
Good tip. Thank you.
Yes.
Selectman Green.
This sounds like a very good win-win type proposal for the town. I'm curious as to why Brookline is the second largest, has the second largest number of gas leaks in the Commonwealth.
I think it's because we are an older community, and our pipes are older than many of the other suburban communities surrounding Boston. I would turn to someone who's much more of an expert than I.
So we're using utility reported data, and we're doing it per linear mile of street, and that's just the data that they report. I assume it has to be because Brookline is an older town with older, primarily cast iron mains under the street. So that's probably why, but I don't know.
That's a little startling.
Yeah.
To say the least.
Who's the top community?
I think it's Cohasset.
Really?
Yes, per linear mile of street. So.
And where is Cambridge? I mean, it's an older town and has a lot of streets.
I think it's one of the top maybe 20, but I could send the top 20 list to you if you want. Yeah. Strange, huh?
I think even Cambridge and Boston have both had more redevelopment than Brookline has until recently. Brookline's had a lot, but that may be why maybe more of their pipes had been redone.
Because when that redevelopment happens,
Yeah.
we tend to get the company out there to fix them.
Selectman Franco?
I'm wondering if we can dig in a little bit to this, commitment not to block any reasonable barriers to the study taking place. Later on our agenda this evening, we've got a public, a noise bylaw waiver hearing. And I wouldn't want to commit to granting a noise bylaw waiver as part of participation in this program. So I don't want to, in effect, give away the farm just to participate in this.
Right, well, I think this is a letter.
Yep.
So we're stating what we would, what we would expect our obligations to be. I don't think we could, we can say that we don't, if you need a noise waiver bylaw, a noise bylaw waiver, you need to come back to us, at that point. But I think this is going to be done pretty much during the day. Is that correct?
Yeah, it'll be done during the day, and if it's in
And
any...
it's weather permitting also, so.
Right.
But it's also potentially repairing or ripping up a street to repair a leak on a major roadway, and there may be other projects going on, and for whatever reason, we don't want that leak repaired at a given time, or we want to try and schedule it, and it may not fit National Grid's work schedule. I'm not against participating in the program. I'm just trying to figure out what we're committing to doing or not doing.
I think National Grid's expecting that, if it's a really busy street or in any way deeply inconvenient to the town, that you would push back and say no to that particular leak. They'll give you a set of leaks that you can choose from. And
I think one of the things about having it in the hands of Peter Ditto, who's back in the back of the room, is that, he's in charge of the permitting, and he'll have a good idea of what kind of work is going on that street, and he'll be able to do that pushback.
Okay.
So I'm not too concerned about it. I think, again, it's weather dependent. It happens after March 1st.
And we have to balance, the benefits of getting rid of these gas leaks or identifying them against the possible inconvenience of a few people.
If we have a super emitter, we know we want it fixed
Right.
as much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, the benefits of getting these gas leaks fixed, not only for the climate reasons, but for safety reasons as well, will outweigh a lot of inconvenience.
And when people see the importance of this, they'll I think, accept a little inconvenience. I mean, within reason, of course.
Okay, so I'm going to offer a motion that we authorize the chair to sign a letter of seeking participation in pilot program conducted by National Grid to test and correct certain gas leaks in the public way. And then I'll add the contingent upon approval of town council. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Yes, Selectman Franco, Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you.
And the next item is Climate Action Week. And I'll start with a thank you for changing the date of Climate Action Week from, we would be doing it kind of like around, well, we would have done it a couple of weeks ago, but we're doing it this year at the end of March into the beginning of April, which is a much pleasanter time of year for some of the outdoor activities. So why don't you guys tell us what's going on?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Dave Pantalone, town meeting member, Precinct 7, co-chair of Climate Action Brookline, and I have with me Mary Dewart, who is also on the steering committee of Climate Week and a member of Climate Action Brookline. So, yeah, we wanted to come and kick off public attention to Climate Week. This will actually be our 7th year of doing Climate Week, and we started last year, was the first year that we moved it to the last week of March following the blizzard, and we might have gotten our 1 week of winter already this week, but we'll have a little bit of a cushion there with the last week of March. so hopefully it won't be raining too much. The dates, as you mentioned, March 27th is a Monday, so it'll be March 27th through April 2nd. We always look for Climate Week to be exciting, informational, and inspirational. There's something there that hopefully appeals to a wide-ranging audience, something that connects people and gets them involved and active, because we always want Climate Week and all of our activities to lead to action. That's why we have the format that we do, where each night is focused on a different level of action. For example, personal versus city and town versus state house versus national. Those are different levels of action, and different people have different interests in different kinds of action. Events for all ages, and you can find the info about all of our events for those dates at the website climateweek2017.org. climateweek2017.org. That will bring you directly to all the information. We also have a new page on the Climate Action Brookline website, which has all that information. So if you went to climateactionbrookline.org, you would find a Climate Week page where you will find all that information. So without going through each of the events in detail, I just wanted to talk here for a second about themes of the year. We always want Climate Week to sort of be in sync with whatever the current times are. And this year, the climate movement really faces a particular challenge because of the anti-climate atmosphere that we have with the new administration down in D.C. The idea here is that we need a lot of push up from the bottom up in order to keep the climate movement going and not to lose ground on progress that we've made in the past. To keep the ball moving forward, we need a lot of push up if we're not going to get much cooperation from the top down. That puts cities, towns, states right in the center of the action. And that's what we hope to motivate with the events during Climate Week. Our tagline for Climate Week this year is Turning Point, Climate Week 2017. Not only because of what's happening in D.C., but actually because of what's happening in Brookline. Urban planning is a theme that underlies several of the events during the week. With all the 40Bs and so forth, urban planning is a critical part of addressing climate change. So we actually, you'll see this theme in 3 of our events. For example, the first night, Monday, March 27th, our keynote event, we'll be discussing a book called Tactical Urbanism, short-term action for long-term change. The speaker, Russell Preston, will be discussing this book and some of the tactics as they're applied to climate action.
I hope he isn't going to come out in favor of our 21-story glass tower. That's
I'm sure he's probably aware of it, but I'm not sure he'll offer an opinion.
Sorry about that.
Wednesday night is our city and town level action event. We're going to be that night. We're going to be talking about gas leaks. We're going to be talking about net zero, and we're also going to have some folks from the city of Somerville coming and talking about their planning process and how they are trying to deal in that planning process with climate change. And then Friday night, our movie night, we have 2 movies condensed into an hour and a half, and there's a very poignant segment in the middle of those movies that also talks about urban design and climate change. So that's sort of an underlying theme, and I mentioned some of the events. I want to turn it over to Mary here, and she can talk about some of the rest.
David mentioned that we're looking at events that cross the personal, local, state, and national levels of action, and Climate Week is really a call to action and an inspiration for people to join
and build and mobilize the climate movement. And one of the things that we're interested in is galvanizing new people and activists who have been involved and want to recommit to the climate movement. Last year we had a climate cafe, so this year we're having Climate Cafe 2017. And it's called Finding Your Place in the Climate Movement. And Ben Hellerstein is the state director for Environment Massachusetts, and he is a new Brookline resident. He'll be presenting about his personal journey into the climate movement, along with Ann Goodwin, who is a singer-songwriter and an activist in the Mothers Out Front movement. So that should be a good personal event. David mentioned a number of the local events, and I'm excited this year that Frank Smizik came to one of our planning meetings with his staffer, Amanda Griffiths, and they are very excited about hosting an event at the State House called Fighting for Climate at the Massachusetts State House. Will Massachusetts lead the nation? Massachusetts is one of the leaders of the climate movement due to for many reasons, including the Global Warming Solutions Act and the early RGGI mandates that came for New England. But we have a lot of bills. Did you know there are 5,000 bills before the Massachusetts State House, and a number of those this season alone, and a number of those are based on climate. And we're lucky to have James Eldridge, who's a state senator, speak, who has sponsored and co-sponsored a number of bills coming. Frank Smizik will be presenting, staffers, and people from the Mass Power Forward a coalition. The Mass Power Forward coalition, of which Climate Action Brookline is an active member, has about 150, 170 organizations that are part of it. And one of the reasons we got as far as we did last year at the State House was because of the hard work and lobby days and calling of the Mass Power Forward coalition, going to hearings, things like that. So that should be a good event. It's at the State House. And then on the national level, we're having an event called the Place of Science, Fossil Fuels, and Clean Energy in Times Ahead, the New Era of Planet History. Scientists have fairly recently declared that planet history is in a new phase of man-made history, that we're moving into a new era. And this important event that will be at Town Hall on a Sunday, actually, will talk about the influence of science, what are the possibilities of science, how is science being undermined at the national level, and what are the roles of the fossil fuel industry and the grip of the fossil fuel industry, and the role of clean energy in envisioning a positive future. So we hope you will all attend like you did last year. It was wonderful to see all of you there, and we'll be contacting you shortly to hope you'll be able to attend our events. So thank you so much for your support in the past, and we really hope you'll recommit to climate action this year as well.
Well, gosh, this sounds like an exciting program, and thanks for doing this. Selectman Franca.
Thank you for organizing what appears to yet again be a great week of activism and information. I'm particularly excited by the events at the end of the week, that being the walk in the Horse Sanctuary, and then the walk along the Muddy River, led by Fran Gershwin. I think that's a great way to get people energized and involved in these issues when they can see the resources that we have in Brookline and make a connection to why it's so important to preserve them. One thing I didn't hear you mention, particularly on the Wednesday night event, is our community choice aggregation program here in Brookline. I think that's something we should be very proud of. And I also think this is a great opportunity to educate people about what's going on as we make that transition in the near future to a new power supplier. And educate about the opt-out and exactly what's going to be happening. So let's seize the opportunity and do some information sharing.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that at the 3R Depot and that will be held this year at the Pierce School, along with the Youth Art and Science Fair, there will be information on community choice aggregation, and I feel very proud of that as well, and thank you all so much for your support.
Great.
Selectman Green.
Yeah. I have some thoughts here, and I just was curious as to your response. Based on what I understand, and I am not a climate scientist, unlike everyone else in Brookline, we're really at a very, very bad place in terms of the climate's, as you say here, history. And the current administration is not going to make it any better. It's going to make it a lot worse. My thinking is that we can't recycle or returbine or wind turbine our way out of this problem. And I'm always concerned that in discussions of climate and addressing climate issues, we're always talking about what I would call defensive measures. More recycling, get rid of plastic bags, do this, do that, other thing. That's not going to solve the problem. And never do we have discussions from all these geniuses at MIT and Harvard, the engineers and scientists, helping us understand what innovative ideas are there out there that can both provide defenses to the climate issues we face, as well as innovation that can help alleviate some of the stresses on the environment. And this is just, it's not a question, it's just a statement. I think we need to make use of the fact that we have a lot of brain power in this community that needs to be tapped to give us some optimistic ideas of how we can get out of this mess through innovation and use of science.
I think there's an event on your schedule that
No,
looks like it's
see
geared
that,
toward
yeah.
what Bernard is talking about, the new era of planet history.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just hoping that does take more than a sort of what I call a defensive stance towards this issue in the discussion.
It's an important big question, and we are talking to people who are not political, who will take smaller steps, and then there are the big thinkers, the scientists you're talking about, who are considering the big picture. And one of them that will present on Sunday is the group that co-founded Soil for Climate. They originally started a biodiversity program and moved over to Soil for Climate because they feel that the soils can absorb and sequester carbon dioxide quite well, and they're working on that aspect of it. We'll present that new idea at that event. So we are stressing those kinds of things, and we do have to stop fossil fuels as well as build the new economy based on green and clean energy. So we've got to layer these actions and accept the fact of what we've done to the planet and encourage people and mobilize people to think of these new ideas which are coming and hopefully will come in time.
Sure. Mr. Pantalone.
I also just quickly comment that with the diversity that we try to present during Climate Week, the question that you raise actually is something that I think we're going to touch on in the Friday night movies that we show. There are those who think that climate change is merely a technical problem. And I personally maintain that it's not just a technical problem. It's much bigger than that. And if you come Friday night, I think we're going to have a very interesting presentation and discussion on that. I don't know if you've ever heard of or seen Michael Moore's movie, Where to Invade Next, but the whole idea of finding some good ideas that other people are doing, even though it may not seem to be relevant to climate change, I think is very relevant to climate change. So just throw that in.
Selectman Heller.
I was going to just make a comment in response to Selectman Green's concerns, and I think that actually when I read the description here of the films by Michael Moore, one of the things that you say is it a transformation in American lifestyle, Western values, and I think one of the things we need to focus on is how do you change people's view of their use of energy, because, and we talk about this when we try to get to net zero for the 9th school, for instance, and when we met with people in Cambridge on MLK school, one of the big training aspects is how do you educate users, children and adults alike, how to behave in a environmentally conscious and climate change conscious way. And I think that is something that we need to focus on and be mindful of.
Okay.
We invite everyone in Brookline and Massachusetts and the nation to come to Climate Week.
Well, this sounds like an exciting event, and thanks once again for bringing it to our attention and organizing it, and I know I'll join you.
Yes.
And looking around.
Challenge me, I will join you too.
I have to ask one question, though. I know you're not having the styrofoam collection anymore, and that company's gone out of business, I heard?
Yes.
I've been diligently collecting that
That's
styrofoam
an important
all year.
detail. That's an important detail. Apparently, it's not cost effective.
Is there
and the
any
company's
place
done a business.
one could take one
We've
styrofoam?
talked to Solid Waste Advisory Committee, and unfortunately, they are this year resigned to the fact that there's no one who will take those basement-full loads of styrofoam that people have been collecting for a year. And it's really heartening to see people pull in their car and loaded with styrofoam.
Yeah.
But this year, unfortunately, we cannot do that.
Okay.
But you can bring your bikes and your eyeglasses and sports equipment and other things.
Styrofoam is one of those issues that we and all the other towns in Massachusetts and the country, we have to figure out how to solve that
Well,
problem.
I think on a very, very grassroots level, one of the things we can do is when we get something, when we buy something that has styrofoam inside the box, contact the companies. They all have customer service. They all have websites. And complain and say, there are plenty of options out there. There's lots of different cardboard and paper options. So I think, again, that's something that we can do. It's a small thing, and it might not work.
We'll put it
but I
on the
think
action
sometimes it
list.
does.
Yeah.
If you have any ideas, all of you, for the action list, please send them to info@climateactionbrookline.org.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make one suggestion? Mobilize Brookline High School students to come up with ideas. I mean, they think outside the box, that we adults sometimes lock ourselves into. And, many times, across the country, students have come up with solutions to problems large and small that, are outside the box and no one thought of. Just
Yeah.
an idea.
No, thank you. We actually are trying to engage the high school much more so this year than we have in the past with some of our other activities this year. So.
There's a Youth in Action forum at the Pierce School on Saturday afternoon being organized by Mothers Out Front. So that's a really important, maybe you'd like to come to that event.
Okay, thank you. Next item on our agenda is a public hearing on the request of National Grid for a waiver of the noise bylaw in connection with a reliability project of the company's gas infrastructure on Beacon Street. Mr. Ditto, is this you?
Sure.
So, would anybody else like some information on gas main replacements? Just a quick little.
So you're Mr. Barkus.
Correct. My name's John Backus. I'm a manager for Community and Customer Relations on the management team for National Grid. I'm actually new to this department, so this is actually good for me to get to meet everybody on the Selectmen's Board. You'll see my business cards there, my cell phone number, my email address, stuff like that. And what we're proposing tonight is that we have a gas main project. I gave you a stapled copy of the entire project. And on the second copy, the single copy of the map, highlighted in green, is the project that was already semi-completed. We did approximately 900 feet of 12-inch main The green highlighted section is the section that we've already completed. We just now have to tie over the gas services on that. So the first two
So
staples.
the part that's completed, almost completed, is from St. Paul to Pleasant, just
Just
for the
about
public.
Pleasant, right.
Yeah.
So that actually is energized with gas. During last summer's project, they started tying over the customer's gas services to that line. So from my understanding, with the traffic, foot traffic, street traffic, car traffic, transportation traffic, it was, proposed that maybe we try to do this at night. And the remaining of the project goes from Pleasant up to Winchester Street with a couple of side street connections along with services that have to be tied over as well. The estimated project's going to last about 3 months. We'd like to start this in March, a little bit early in the season, but we're trying to get ahead of the game. We understand there's a lot of inconveniences on doing this work, whether it be day or night. We know it's an inconvenience to residents, we know it's an inconvenience to the businesses, we know it's an inconvenience to the commuters, students, so we understand how sensitive this area is. To be able to make progress and get the job done, we'd like to be able to do a night shift, working Sunday to Thursday. So Sunday night, approximately starting at 7 p.m., being off the road at 5 a.m., and working until Thursday till Friday morning
For 3 months?
for 3 months.
What,
Well, the good thing about it is that it's in a relatively, it's a commercial area.
Yeah,
And most of
Right.
those buildings, as I'm thinking about it, fronting Beacon Street there are commercial buildings. There are a couple of places where apartment buildings or condominiums where people are residing, but for the most part, I think it's commercial. It's going to be, yeah.
well, I mean, sometimes the first floor is commercial and it's residential up above.
Yeah,
How noisy is this work?
so it's, it's construction. It is noisy.
Jackhammers.
We don't use jackhammers as much as we used to. What we do is we saw cut the road. So in the notification to the council there's actually a couple of links there that you'd be also able to put onto like the town website, and I think it's ngrid/main or something like that. I don't know if I have the copy with me, but it's
Service line.
so service line is for a home.
Oh, main line.
Yeah, and then the main line. So that's a good link to take a look at if somebody ever wanted to see exactly what we do. It gives you a rough idea and starts from the beginning to the end. But normally we saw cut the street and we try to stay away from jackhammers. The crew that would be working this job is a crew from Feeney Brothers Excavating Incorporated. They've been doing it for many years. They are sensitive to the noise. So they're aware that, hey, listen, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Don't start up the jackhammer right now. We're going to have to do this tomorrow at 7. So they're sensitive to that stuff. They've been advised about this stuff. They know that, there's going to be noise. The biggest complaint we usually get is something along the lines of the backup alarms. But we have to have backup alarms because, God forbid, it's dark, even in the daylight, somebody behind you have to know that the machinery's backing up. So that seems to be one of the biggest complaints that I've experienced in my career. People calling up, can you at least just stop the beeping noise? Beep, beep, beep. So that's something we can't get away with. The jackhammering we can deal with. Yep, there might be some jackhammering because we might run into cobblestones or concrete or something like that where we have to hammer it away. But it's general construction noise. You're going to have machinery out there, you're going to have dump trucks out there, you're going to have equipment running, there's a generator running, so it is, general construction noise The biggest complaint is always the backup alarms. And I just, I'm one of those people that just is going to tell you exactly how it is. That's the big #1 complaint.
We just redid Beacon Street
Yeah, right,
a
I was
couple of
just
years
thinking
ago.
that. We just repaved Beacon Street, didn't we?
So I'm surprised this work wasn't done.
So I can't answer to that. Again, I'm new into this department. I come from the South Shore Department, and they've transitioned me into this area, Brookline being one of my areas for community and customer management. So I was out there and didn't really notice that it was brand new and just redone. I don't know the timeline of when Beacon Street was done. I don't know.
It was lower Beacon Street, I think, for the most part.
Yeah, about 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, so,
And,
go ahead.
you know, at that point
Peter.
in time. That was about 6 or 7 years ago, and at that point in time, we notify National Grid, Eversource, all the utilities before we go into a street, particularly in a major street like Beacon. And we have a little conference, and we let everybody know that we're going to be doing the street. If you have to get in there and get your main sealed up or removed and replaced, now's the time to do it. Evidently, at that point in time, it wasn't an issue. Now it is.
Well, I've just got to say, because I heard a lot from, I was on the board at that time, and it was a couple of years of disruption for some of the merchants and restaurants along Beacon Street, and it really affected their business. So my concern here is this going to be the sort of thing that would mean people can't climb over this to go into the restaurant, or how disruptive is this going to be to life on Beacon Street?
So it will be, again, an inconvenience. Sidewalks will always remain open. They'll always be able to have one lane of traffic flowing down the street. The reason for nights is more so for the traffic reasons. So at night, we're sensitive to, the commercial buildings and stuff like that. That's why we suggest not doing Friday night and Saturday night. So, Thursday night, we really got to get out there Thursday night to be able to get it done. Now, you could tear this up into days or, smaller phases where like, okay, get out there for a month, do what you can do, come back next year and do a month. But I don't think we want to go through this every year for a small section of pipe every year to try to get it done during the season. It will be an inconvenience, but we can have signs, we can have message boards saying that while under construction, businesses are open. We can make sure that, those signs are moved in the appropriate areas, as recommended from the, the DPW. So
How many months did you say it's going to be?
3 months.
I put down 3 months. If I told you 2.5 months or 2 months and we weren't done, we'd be back here saying, how come we're not done? We would really love to be done in 2 months. Don't get me wrong, we don't want to go out in Beacon Street in that intersection and do this, but it's a necessity. It's time for that pipe to be taken out of there.
So could you describe to us, is this an old cast iron pipe that you're taking out?
Yeah, so our records for that section of pipe indicate that it's cast iron 1927 and earlier.
So it's 100 years old.
Yeah, and there's also some wrought iron pipe in the area as well, which is even worse than the cast iron pipe. The pipe needs to go. And, 5-6 years ago when it was petitioned to maybe do this, again, I wasn't involved at that time, but all of a sudden that cast iron goes, it cracks. You can't look at it and tell that it's structurally solid or weak. Sometimes you could look at cast iron and think it's as solid as a rock, and you could take a hammer to it and it'll just break like it's brittle. And then also with frost and the temperatures going up and down, it's subject to shifting and then also cracking instantly. And then all of a sudden you have an emergency crew out there. So this is an area that National Grid has pinpointed as needs to be done. It's a high-profile area. There's no way about it. I'm not going to steer anybody in the wrong direction. I'm just going to tell you exactly, what we need to do, how we need to do it, how long I think it's going to take. And I know that, there's the marathon coming through there and there's events coming through there, and we understand that. So, we're willing to make sure that during certain times that there's no road plates out there. From one night to the next night, there'll probably be road plates out there, bermed and pinned. But on the nights, for the weekends and stuff like that, button it up. Just no plates for the weekends.
And it's not an option to inject something into the existing pipes to reinforce them?
Not in this size. We do that practice in certain pipe, but the diameter of that pipe has to be 24 inches or larger. And that's also a bigger project, and for something like this in such a congested area, when you do inject the liner, you have to be able to run a bypass above ground in the street and feed every customer off of it, and you're talking, 100 customers.
So you did part of this work, I think from St. Paul to Pleasant, we said.
Correct.
Without a noise bylaw waiver. So I think, why do we need a noise bylaw waiver for this second half of the project?
So they were able to get that work done, and it wasn't really a very good timely manner, and the traffic and the complaints that we were getting from businesses and residents combined, from my understanding, was outstanding. It was bad. And now it's shifted, the main has shifted, so to be able to have a corridor to be able to put our 12-inch gas main in, we got to be able to close down at least a lane, or run a detour into the other lane. And to be able to do that, there's no way of doing that during the day, I mean, you could do it during the day, but you're only going to get 20 feet in a day, and it's going to be really slow moving. And,
So the choice is if you do it during the day, then it's just going to take a lot longer, is that what you're saying?
realistically, it's going to take a very long time to be able to get that done.
What's the plan for storage of equipment and materials? So I know I have a project going on in front of my house, and it seems like I've been looking at pipes and parking spaces and trucks parked there overnight for months now. So what I wouldn't want to have happen is have this work occur in the evenings and lose a large number of parking spaces on one of the large commercial thoroughfares in town.
Absolutely. No, the contractor will always get an area in a congested area like that where there's no actual area to be able to, store pipe or something like that. If we had to take up spaces or something, we'd obviously, pay the fee and the meter and stuff, but we don't want to do that either. For the most part of this work, it would probably, we need a laydown area for our pipe. The pipe comes in 40-foot lengths. So we need an area where we can find that. The contractor, on most norms, will go out, find an area, sometimes pay somebody to use their lot or something like that. And then we try to keep everything off the street to the best of our ability. Sometimes we do leave some pipe on the side of the road in our construction area, but for the most part, like you're talking about, it sounds like more like a residential neighborhood, what they did, which is wrong. And you can talk to me about that later, but what they did was they found a nice open area and they says, let's put everything here.
Yeah, that's what they did.
And then every night they park their backhoe there, they park their dump truck there, they leave their pipe there, they leave their stock there, then they go home.
Cypress Street.
Excellent. So I get what they did there, and it's not the right practical methods that they should be using. So, but what happens is
they're saying.
Yeah, no, and that's just what they do, because that's, okay, hey, we'll put it here. They think they can do that, they think they have the right to do that. Some people don't mind. They know that it's being done, they know it's construction. Some people don't complain about it, so they get away with it. So I understand, and that's just...
I'm complaining about it, so...
No, and it's not right, because this is the way I operate with, and again, I'm new to this area, so this is my new jurisdictional area. But I treat everything the way as if it was my grandmother's house. Not my house, my grandmother's house. Her house gets shoveled better than my house. So that's the way they're supposed to work in areas. And, all I can do is work on it. So...
I have another question.
Sure.
Earlier in the meeting, we're talking about a pilot program with National Grid, the super emitters. So, in this particular area, is there a super emitter?
So I don't know if there is in the pilot program, but what
I'm not asking you if this is in the pilot program. I'm asking you.
Yes, this would be an area that is considered high risk
for a super emitter.
For National Grid. Again, I don't know the pilot program, and I don't know that term. So we have high-risk areas, and we have, in violation areas, and then we have violation areas. So this is a high-risk in violation. So this has several leaks. They've had a leak history going on there, and what our engineers do is they run a program, and they say, this is the area we need to work on this year.
Okay.
And, we have a forecast out for about, 5 years, a good 3-year forecast of the work that we need to get done. And it goes up and down, working with the town and stuff like that. They might say to us, hey, we're going to pave this street, and this street this year. Do you think you should do that? And now we've been working much better with towns throughout New England, and we try to go after those streets that you guys are going to be doing reconstruction work. Doesn't always work that way, but the last thing National Grid wants to do nowadays is be that contractor that's out there digging up a leak that you just paved. And we know it's all happened before, and we're really trying to stay away from stuff like that. So we're trying to work with all the towns and the surrounding areas to do that. And again, I know this is a very, very big inconvenience for the businesses, the homeowners, but we have to pick and choose our battles here. Are we going to get a lot of complaints from the residents? I would imagine we're gonna. Are we gonna get complaints from the businesses? I would imagine we're gonna. If we do it during the day, how many more complaints are we gonna get? How long is it gonna take? Are we better off doing it at night and try to get it done in 3 months?
Selectman Green.
Yeah, I assume you'd get a lot more complaints if the pipe burst and you had to come out and do an emergency repair.
We don't use the word burst, so.
Well, whatever happened, okay.
Yeah,
Exploded.
yes, we don't use that word either.
Okay. I'm curious, what type of material is being used to replace, in the replacement pipes?
It's a polyethylene plastic pipe.
What's the useful life of that?
They say it's gonna last forever, so,
Okay.
but.
How long
that's-
forever?
100 years ago, they probably said that about the cast iron.
So, in my experience, this pipe is, and I've been doing it about 20 years now, so in my experience, this is the best. The procedures that they have, the training that the guys have to do to go through it, I would say this is the best pipe I've seen come through in a long time. Even, the pipe that I've taken out of the ground, the plastic pipe when it first came out, was really kind of almost like a PVC type of electrical duct line. Now the wall thickness is much thicker. The way it's put together, it's a bead that's put together, it's heated up and placed together that way. So yeah, they're saying it's gonna last forever, but we all know, everybody says things last forever, I mean, I want a Tesla because that's gonna last forever too, but, it's supposed to be, that's what they tell us, it's lifelong, I can't see anything going wrong with it.
A question for Mr. Ditto. What was how wide a notice was given of this hearing? Because is anyone here to speak on this hearing? So I'm just surprised that given something of such magnitude and impact on the center of town, that
Yeah.
no one's here.
So I did receive 2 phone calls. One person I've spoken to, the other person that we played phone tag I have not spoken to. Most of it was more on how are they going to get the gas line from the new into their, the condo association. That was the concern that we had. The timeline we tried to do 2 weeks. It wasn't posted in the paper until I think it was the 9th it was posted on. The letters went out on the 2nd. And then we have another abutters notification, very similar to the Dear City official letter, the natural gas, that'll also go out if this is approved as well. And then we sent out, I believe it was 77 letters to condo associations. They went to P.O. boxes. We can only send them out to the contacts we have. We can't hit everybody as much as we would like to. We can only do the ones that are paying their bills, the accounts that we have on file.
Okay. Um, Really?
I don't know. They can't convene a public hearing anyway.
Well, that's what we're doing. Any questions or comments from the board?
Well, it sounds like this is work that needs to be done.
Right, yeah.
And unfortunately, there's going to be some disruption and some inconvenience, and I think probably doing it at night, so there's going to be some noise, but less huge traffic impacts, so that seems like the way to go.
And there's no way to turn off the backup alarms.
There's not, no, it's illegal.
That's federal, that's
Yeah,
OSHA
it's illegal,
regulations.
yeah.
Yeah, I seem to remember when they were doing the BU Bridge project, one of the many times they've redone the BU Bridge, they took off the audible alarms and put on flashing lights instead.
Yeah, we have the flashing lights and we have to have them. There's no if and or buts about it. We're regulated to have those alarms on.
There were just, with snowplows, there were 2 people killed in the last couple of days getting hit by snowplows, so,
Not here, right?
Not in Brookline.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I think, trucks at night, when people can't see as well, not everybody uses common sense in terms of getting near them.
And no impact on MBTA service or anything
No,
like
we
that?
won't impact the MBTA, and if there was any type of impact on the MBTA, we work very well with the MBTA and the supervisors with them, so we,
It's the MBTA working with you that I'm worried about.
we work well with them. We do contact them, we reach out to them, we get inspectors out there whenever we need, if we're close to a T-line or anything like that. And again, there's a question and answers thing in there that is useful. I think it's useful to anybody. That link, if you wanted to put it on the town website, it kind of shows people what we're going to be doing out there. It's more in a residential area than a commercial area out there. Everybody thinks the gas company's out there just, 5 guys working and 1 guy in the hole, and it's not true. There's usually a lot of men and women that are working very, very hard, and they don't want to be out there at night. They'd much rather be there during the day. It's just going to be less impact and less inconvenience to the people if we do work at night, unfortunately.
Selectman Green?
On your maps, you have some red areas called contaminated areas. You know anything about what the contamination is?
So that's areas
and
that
how
have
does that
been,
affect your work?
So that's areas that have been identified to us. So prior to, all of our mapping has contaminated areas that have either been identified by us or identified by towns, municipalities, and cities. And our environmental has already looked into it, and so the city of Brookline encountered soil contamination in the roadway in 2012. All soils in this general area were removed from the site and backfilled with clean fill. So our environmental department requests that when we start digging, periodically, they're going to take a sample to see if there's anything good or bad in there. But as of right now, we consider that to be clean fill. So we don't consider any contamination. There was some work that went on, and again, that was identified to us. And we work well with Clean Harbors. If there was dirty dirt or anything like that, we would just call them in, we would get rid of it, haul it out of there.
Okay. Any other? This is a public hearing. Do I see anyone who wishes to speak on this noise bylaw waiver request? I see none.
I just want to make one other point. On this map, you also frequently use the expression cut, cap, and abandon. So I'm assuming you're leaving that old cast iron there.
Yes, that's our practice. We do.
And just laying the new stuff.
Yeah, so we seal it on all ends that have been opened, and it stays right there. Yeah.
Is there any lead contamination from that?
No, what we do is we do a PCB wipe sample. So on any cast iron pipe, we'll take a sample, send it to the lab to see if there's any contamination. But on the outside of the pipe, no. It's the inside of the pipe that you'd be concerned about. And again, we seal it, cap it off, and we also take samples and make notes if we do have any contamination on that.
Why would there not be lead contamination on the outside? Is it a different material?
It's the cast iron pipe, so we don't use any lead materials on that pipe.
Mr. Kleckner is writing out some language.
What was
for me.
the date, the time of proceeding of the work each day?
He said 7 PM to 5 AM, Sunday to Thursday.
Yeah, and the reason we went with 7, believe me, I'd rather say 5, because just the
No,
setup.
you're not tearing the
No,
street
no.
up at 5.
No.
No, and just so you know, it's going to take an hour just to set the roadway up for work. You know, it's going to take an hour to break it down. So you lose 2 hours to set up a roadway like that.
Is there any way you could schedule the loudest work during the earlier part of that period?
That's what we're sensitive to. The company crew and the foreman on the job has already been notified about situations like that, and along with, the supervisor would have been here. He actually had I think it's Valentine's Day or something like that today, so he actually is a newlywed. And he had a date tonight. I have 20 years, so I was allowed to go. But yes, we definitely, again, same thing with the jackhammer or something like that. You know, hey, 1 o'clock in the morning, we might want to think about doing that. You know, if it's going to be, 5 minutes, bang, 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 and you can get that piece of concrete out of the way, yeah. 3 o'clock in the morning, bang, 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 no. So that's how they're going to be advised. If everybody's going to have my cell phone number and my email, which hey, that's what I'm here for. So
Okay, so are we ready for a motion?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll move that we authorize a waiver of the noise bylaw in connection with work of National Grid on Beacon Street from, what are the dates?
we'd like to start March 1st.
March 1st through June 1st?
June 1st, yes, sir.
Sunday through Thursday, 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. Any special conditions?
Don't make too much noise.
We will do the best we can, so.
Okay, so that's the motion. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
And before you leave, Mr. Barkus, I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about gas leaks, but I think you weren't here yet. So we were told we're in the process of working on developing an additional elementary school in town because we have many kids. And it's the site of an old school on Heath Street is what we're going to use for the new school. And nearby at the intersection of Hammond Street and Heath, which Mr. Ditto can show you.
I did hear that, and I made a note.
Okay.
Daily, is
Yes.
that correct? I made a note that you commented on that, and I will look into that.
Okay.
So that's your concern, that there's a smell or an odor of gas?
Well, and apparently you guys have repeatedly go out there and work on it, but it never gets completely fixed, is what the neighbors told me.
So,
And so, I'm thinking, as we're going to have major construction in the area and
yep.
then, kids and so forth and so on, it would be good to get this taken care of before we get farther along in our
Sure,
project
I did make a note of that. We can look at the, what we have for the infrastructure over there. And the disadvantage I have right now working with the town of Brookline is I'm new to this area. I'm more from the South Shore. So once I get up to speed and stuff like that, I'll be able to hopefully remember a situation. But I do remember something about that area, Heath and Hammond, maybe there's something coming up, a project there. I don't know if you might happen to know of something or, so I know there's something about that area that rang a bell when I heard it, so I did make a note of it. And
Well, we are proposing to put in better crosswalks and things like that right there. So it would be, again, it would be good to just get this taken care of once and for all before we get underway with the stuff we're working on.
Yeah, I did make a note, and I definitely can look into that. And
Yeah, let Mr. Ditto know what you
Sure.
discover, so he will pass it
Absolutely.
on to us.
Yeah.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
thank you. Look forward to working with
Thank you, Mr. Barkus. Okay, moving on to the next item on our agenda is interviews for the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. Mary Litterst? Welcome. Well, tell us about yourself and your interest in SWAC.
Can you hear me?
I think so,
Can you
yeah.
hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a longtime resident of Brookline and always been interested in this topic, and it was very interesting tonight to hear about the climate discussion. And for years I've been reading about SWAC and recycling, and when I saw that there were some retirements and positions open, I thought, this is my chance. So I was thrilled to try and express my interest. And the issue of recycling and trash handling is very constant because I'm a trustee in a 16-unit condominium. And that has over years changed its profile a little bit. And so that is always a continuing topic of discussion and exploration. So it'd be nice to see also what is happening in other parts of town. My relationships with DPW have been very helpful in the past. They always answer my questions and have been very helpful. So it's nice to try and promote what they do.
So I see you've attended at least one SWAC meeting.
Two.
Two,
I
good.
do.
Okay. And you still want to do it?
Absolutely. They're very welcoming.
Yeah. Questions from the board?
No, I have to confess, I've known Mary for years.
Yes.
Any?
Yeah, excuse me. So do you get to do much, I mean, I'm assuming being a librarian, reference librarian, that you have excellent research skills.
I have tried. I try.
And so I'm wondering whether you've done much research on solid waste and the methods of dealing with it and reducing it and burning it or burying it.
Right. Actually, I haven't done that for my professional life. I've done it personally a little bit, but I expect I would do more on the advisory committee if they asked me to. You might have known that the Senior Center, their Public Issues Advisory Committee, had a reading within the last couple of years. On the book was The Big Necessity, which is about waste disposal, which was a great book, actually. And I've been to certain programs. The Athenaeum has had some very good programs that MIT has been involved in, talking about climate change effects in the Boston waterfront area. So I look forward to doing more, actually. Where I work is part of a consortium, and Wentworth is one of our members. So I particularly like their collection for this kind of materials. It's great.
Selectman Franco.
One of the things you say in your application is you want to improve education of condominium trustees and contractors. I'm wondering if you can just expand on that a little bit and give an indication of what you think people lack knowledge about today.
Well, I think my experience is that some trustees are new to property ownership, for example, and most likely haven't had that kind of experience in an urban setting. And so they're not too aware of how this is handled in an urban setting. Mm-hmm. And it requires a lot of education. And the more resources that I find we can use outside of our own experience, which comes from, if you've been on a board a long time, you're viewed as maybe too experienced or too old. So we want to use resources that have credibility outside of the board.
Okay, I think.
I do have
yep.
one more question.
Go for it.
I noticed that you've listed here that one of your activities is a participant in the street tree inventory.
Yes. That was many years ago, but you might have knowledge of it. It was a wonderful experience. Brookline had a grant to conduct a street tree inventory, and they with UMass, and they were evaluating whether a trained arborist would do the same kind of output on the inventory that trained citizens would do. That was part of the experiment, as well as actually undertaking the survey. And they found that trained lay people were pretty good. It was a wonderful opportunity, really. We got just wonderful training and a lot of involvement of
Well, we do have a trained arborist.
Yes.
And he's great.
Yes.
But it's only one of them.
Right.
So it's nice to know that he can train volunteers.
Oh, yes, they did wonderful work. And it was back in the 90s. I was in the 90s, so it was a while ago. I think I read that there was another type of tree survey that was being evaluated, whether or not they would take it up. But I don't remember the specifics.
Okay, we're not going to be voting tonight,
Okay,
but
right.
You'll hear from us shortly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. We have one more interview, Mr. Schreffler, John Schreffler. Welcome.
I'm a town meeting member for Precinct 2, and my interest in SWAC directly arose from participating in the last two town meetings and observing the heat that was generated by the paper throw. And while I was doing that, I got an email from John Dempsey, who's the chair of SWAC, and John was my son's first principal, so I became very interested in serving with him because he was such an impressive person. I'm in every sense of the word with this sort of stuff green. I came to the town meeting as a green space advocate, and over the course of attending, I had my horizon broadened. I became part of the Green Caucus and observed the paper throw from the point of view that it was a little late in the game. I lived in Switzerland for about 9 years. We had bag paper throw, and it had been an old thing by the time I moved there in '94. So I was kind of perplexed that it was still an issue of controversy, and, just as I sat through, thought as the openings came up that it would be interesting and useful to sit on the board. I've attended a couple of the meetings. It's a very nice board. I've been particularly impressed with the DPW liaison, Ed Gilbert. He is an incredibly competent, together individual, very committed. So, without any experience at all, I'm basically having the impudence to put myself up and throw my hat in the ring.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
Well, I'm interested in this issue of the mindset of the Swiss people versus the mindset of Americans. Because I think
the Swiss were a very interesting experience. We moved there from the south side of Chicago, and the recycling usually lost out to the rats down there. And they had a very, very advanced system. The they'd had a very embarrassing accident.
Not in Chicago, you mean in Switzerland?
In Switzerland.
Okay.
The Swiss had a very nasty accident where they killed the Rhine in '87, and they died of embarrassment. They had a fire in an area just south of Basel that released a whole bunch of toxins, and it turned them into a real bunch of recycling fanatics. They were just completely committed to the environmental protection regime. They had bag pay per throw. There was fiduciary take-back imposed on the merchants for small appliances and things that you couldn't dispose of in the landfill. You were obliged to separate out your paper, slick and pulp, and tie them up very neatly in a Boy Scout box knot using hemp. You couldn't use plastic. They had recycling bins all over town, and it was interesting to watch. People did it. And they had things in their site that we don't seem to notice. I remember particularly that they were hep on keeping batteries out of the landfill. They considered them to be extremely toxic and dangerous and something that required special handling, and I haven't seen that here. When I attended the first meeting at the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, John was going on about bag pay per throw, which is actually a good idea. But the devil's in the details with this stuff. We had a 2-year period where they had a subpar contractor, and the bags ripped. And I asked John if he was prepared to deal with the blowback of Brookline residents if they got a bunch of bags that split open when you dump cat litter in them. That happened to me for 2 years straight. And the bags were expensive. They kept them locked up behind cases because people would try and shoplift them because they cost about $30 a roll a ton.
Wow.
Yeah.
Little things like that. It was.
So they bury their trash, they don't burn it?
I wasn't aware of exactly how they did, but I think they mainly used landfill for the stuff, but they were just fanatic about keeping everything out of the landfill that they possibly could. I mean, it was Giuliani said that it's recycling but not religion, but the Swiss almost never went to church, but they recycled like maniacs. And I can bring that as a kind of a perspective because John said that the Europeans tended to be way ahead, and I actually have relatively recent experience with that. That's where we came from when we moved to town in 2003.
Wow. You'll bring an interesting international perspective to the committee.
You know, green otherwise, but I do have that. And it was interesting, the town meeting kind of is an educational process. I'm sure you've all experienced that.
Oh, yeah.
I always get surprised at how intensely people feel about things that I never dreamt people could. And it seems to me like the advisory commission could use alternate spokesmen in the town meeting. Clint Richmond is on the board right now, and I think one of the last candidates last time was also in the town meeting. But it seemed to me that the thing that particularly drew my attention was the selectmen's amended motion on the pay-per-throw bylaw proposed. And I was already in favor of what you suggested because it made sense. But it struck me that at the time it might have been more useful to have a member of the commission actually get up and address that at the town meeting, and I didn't notice anybody doing that.
I don't recall.
I don't recall. I think Clint would have been the only person who was on, and he's all over the place.
I think John Dempsey was in the room.
I think he was, but I don't think he spoke.
Yeah.
And that may have had his reasons. So
yeah.
I'm making myself available for liaison that way, too. No?
Any other questions?
How many openings do we have?
2, I believe.
Okay.
No.
Okay, so...
I went twice, and I'd go back.
Okay, thank you. We're not voting tonight, but you'll hear from us.
Are these the only occupants?
I don't know. Well, why don't we do the budget, and then we have one item. Well,
Planning board?
yeah, while they're setting up, we have the question of authorizing, don't know. I don't know. Authorizing the appearance of certain offices on the May 2nd annual town election, and we have a notice from the town clerk that there are some openings for town meeting member, a two-year term on precinct 12, one-year terms in precincts 2, 4, and 6, and then additionally, no, that's
This is
it.
the same ones, he's
Right.
just telling you why there's the openings, who's left.
Right, so I think the motion is, the final version must be delivered. That we approve the notice of election as transmitted to us by the town clerk, as indicated on page 11-2 of our package. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Mr. Clerk?
I'm sorry. On page 11-3,
That's just,
Same openings,
Same.
he's just telling you why there are openings. So
That's fine.
I don't believe that
that's fine. He just confused
that
me.
information
Okay.
would go on the ballot. I think just the openings go on the ballot.
right. Okay, the next item, which is the last item on tonight's agenda, is the presentation of the fiscal year 2018 financial plan. And this is the beginning of the public phase of the consideration of the town budget in preparation for the May 2017 town meeting, and where we ask town meeting members to approve the town budget. So, Mr. Kleckner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and ladies and gentlemen of the board. My pleasure this evening to present the proposed fiscal 2018 financial plan. We refer to our budget as a financial plan because it's not only the ensuing year's budget, but it also represents a long-term picture of our operating budget as well as our capital improvement plan, which is also a multi-year effort. So it really is three things in one. But tonight we'll focus mostly, or I'll focus mostly on the operating budget for next fiscal year beginning on July 1st, and then Melissa Goff will dive into a lot more detail, including the capital improvement plan and the projects that are proposed to be funded next year. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Melissa and Austin on my staff, who really puts this document together. And I think you've heard, not just from us, but from others, including our auditor, how detailed and important this document is. It's essentially, really a narrative of, what the town does, all of our financial policies and our programs and our budgeting strategies. And also, I think, as you know, we have repeatedly received an award for this document from the Government Finance Officers Association, or GFOA, for a Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. We certainly hope to and expect to get one for this document as well. But I really want to acknowledge especially Melissa's efforts. This is really takes most of the year, frankly, to put this document together. I get to present it in a half an hour, but there's so much work behind that. I really do want to formally acknowledge Melissa and Austin's effort. So let's go into the plan. Fiscal 2018, we've hit the $300 million mark, and our overall budget represents now $303 million, balancing revenues and expenses. And I refer to that as all-in, meaning this is all the enterprise funds and the revolving and self-supporting funds as well. So this is everything all in, and that represents a 4.2% increase over last year. This budget, the school budget, increases by 3.3%. We'll talk a little bit about how we derived that number. Our municipal budgets are increasing by 1.7%. Our capital budget, which is the fiscal 18 projects of the capital improvement plan, will now be 8.8% of the prior year net revenue. Our fiscal policies require 7.5%, so we're actually higher than that, but there's good reason for that, including trying to do as much as we can to set aside funds for the school projects and the school expansion projects that we have planned. Our enterprises are up modestly by 1.1%, and I'm pleased to report again that all of our reserve and long-term liability policies and the funding are meeting our goals this year. I did have, sometimes I will refer to a budget with a theme. You might remember the bridge budget and other budgets, and I was trying to think of a theme for this one, and all I could come up with is it could be a lot worse. And it's true. But I'm not going to call it that. That's a little too informal. But just literally 3 weeks ago, we were faced with making some very difficult operating budget reductions. I think you heard some of those and heard a preview of that the first time we gave you a preview of the budget several weeks ago. But fortunately, we were the recipient of some better news from the Group Insurance Commission, who we have our employee health insurance with. We were initially projecting at least a 7.5% increase, and now we're down to 5%, which has significant budget relief implications. And also, we didn't anticipate quite as high as state aid numbers that the governor presented, so we're pleasantly surprised with those. And the result of that is, at least I can speak on the town side, we will be able to retain our staff and our major programs and services. That's not to say it'll be easy. We're not increasing staff and haven't increased staff much at all in the last few years, and we have a cumulative set of real strong priorities and mandates that we're dealing with, which I'll get into as well. So let's look at the budget. The items on the revenue side that I want you to focus on, if you look at the last final right-hand column, the percent change from the prior year, you'll see local receipts going up by 24% and other available funds going down by 61%. That's the same item. And because of state law, we are shifting a major source of revenue, parking meter revenue, from what was previously an other available fund into local receipts. So there's no net change there, but you'll see a major shift in the category of revenue as well as the expenditures when we get there. So again, this is the summary of the budget going up by 4.2% all in. This is the third and final year of our override 3-year plan. As you will remember, that we identified about $10 million that would be part of the overall funding plan for 3 years, funding plan for the schools to meet their enrollment challenges. The big part of that was the $7,665,000 in override funds that the town went to referendum, was voted in, and there was also about $2.3 million of non-property tax or municipal efficiencies that made up a $10 million funding plan over 3 years. And you see the 3 years how that was distributed. So in year 3, which is the fiscal 18 budget we're talking about, we are going to be moving up $1.29 million from this plan over to the schools as part of our plan. One of the things we want to talk about is that, 3 years ago, starting from the Override Study Committee's analysis, we identified a number of non-tax revenues as well as efficiencies that totaled, our projection was $1.7 million. We have, that was the operating revenue, and then when you add in the other revenue, you see a larger number. We did not meet our projection in some of those areas, and Melissa will talk a little bit about why. We did do better in some areas, but overall, you see in the bottom line, we were $770,430 short of our initial target. But I want to be very clear, that money has been taken from the municipal side of the budget and provided as promised in the override plan to the schools. So even though we were unable to meet some of those, we had to make do, and materialize that $770,000, and I want to assure you that that is in the school department's budget for fiscal 18. This is a depiction of the revenues in a pie chart. You see the property tax by far, almost 70% now is reflected in the town's revenue picture. State aid is now lower than 7%. So as we go forward, you'll see the property tax and local receipt numbers getting bigger as part of that pie, and state aid and some of the other available funds diminishing. But this is the all-in picture. Later, when Melissa makes her presentation, you'll see a different revenue pie or an expenditure pie when we fully load all the costs. This is by budget categories, and you'll see on the expenditure side at least a different picture, and Melissa will explain why that is. So let's talk about the revenues. Property taxes, I mentioned, $211 million. That represents over 2/3, actually 70% of the town's revenue pie. That is an increase over last year of $7.23 million, or 3.5%. You might ask, how can we increase our taxes by 3.5% when we have a 2.5% limitation on Proposition 2.5? Well, the answer is that you'll see that 2.5% increase is $5,075,000, but under Proposition 2.5, we're able to tax new construction, the value of new construction in our community. It's referred to as new growth, and we are projecting $2.1 million in new growth that we can add on top of our 2.5% tax levy limit. And we'll talk about where that money is coming from. And then we always will add on top of the levy limit the debt exclusion. This happens to be the debt exclusion, the old debt exclusion on the old high school project, which is nearing its end, but still there's $1 million left in that, and that gets built on top of the 2.5% tax levy. So overall, it's a 3.5% increase in the property tax levy. Our state aid is up by about 3.1%. This is based on the governor's budget that he submitted a couple weeks ago. UGGA stands for Unrestricted General Government something, aid, and that's going to be increasing at $238,000 for us, or 3.9%. And that reflects the governor's commitment to tie the local aid to essentially to share revenue, and we call it revenue sharing. And so basically when the governor and the legislature and others get together and decide how much state revenue will increase over the next year, they have committed to then give us that same percentage increase in the unrestricted government aid account. We think that's a really strong political victory for cities and towns to have that revenue sharing component sort of built into this governor's budget. We're very appreciative of that. Chapter 70 is not the case. That's our largest account. It's our education aid account. It is growing up to $418,000, but that's primarily a result of the fact that we're still not, the state still does not provide the sufficient amount of share of education aid to our city. They have made a commitment to do 17.5% at a minimum to every city and town in the Commonwealth. We're not there yet. So we're still in that catching up mode, and that's where our $418,000 is coming from. So we're still doing slightly better than other communities in our, similar to us, which are referred to as minimum aid communities. We believe that the House and the Senate might address that, as they usually do. This is not a lot of increase, especially when you consider the increasing enrollment that we're facing. So we're cautiously optimistic that the House and the Senate might provide a little bit more revenue in that area, but we didn't feel comfortable making that recommendation yet. So this is based on the governor's budget. Local receipts is up. Again, this is somewhat misleading, the 24%, because it is taking parking meter receipts, which previously had to be accounted for in a separate fund, and allowing us to treat it as a local receipt instead. And so that's why you see that difference in the increase. But as I said, it's no net increase or decrease in parking meter receipts. It's essentially the same. We did increase the parking meter rate, and so we're taking advantage of that, but there's no necessary increase based on the change in state law. We are increasing our lodging and meals local option taxes by about 6.3%, and that's the result of those two hotel projects on the former Red Cab site and the Circle Cinema. So as you probably know, hotels are a good value for the town. I'm not going to speak about their land use value, but their financial value are good for the town because not only are we getting the new growth revenue and the property tax, but we're also being able to take advantage of the local share of the excise tax for meals and rooms. That's that. Building permit activity continues to be strong in this town based on the economy, and so we're able to increase that by 4.2%. Motor vehicle excise tax is 2%, and most of the other revenues are fairly flat with a 1 or 2% increase. So that's local receipts. The other category of revenue is free cash. We had a total certified, well, first let me explain free cash. That's a misnomer, I think, in local government. I think some people think it's free or cash, and it's neither of those. It's basically our unreserved fund balance, our fund balance from the prior year when the year is over. We submit our numbers to the state, and the state then tells us what they feel is the unreserved amount that we could appropriate. We chose, and we have adopted a policy now that we leave money in unappropriated and free cash to meet our unreserved fund balance policy. That unreserved fund balance policy says that we should have at least 10% of our general fund revenues in reserves as an unreserved fund balance. That includes both free cash as well as the stabilization fund, and I'm pleased to report that we're projecting that we will be above that 10% number, in fact 11% next year. And as you know, that's really essential for the bond rating agencies. They look very carefully at that, and if you're below 10%, as we were getting very close, if not fall below, really risk our premier bond rating. So as a result, we don't appropriate $2.5 million of our free cash, but that still leaves $8.35 million, which is a very healthy number for us. And we use that, according to our policy, for one-time reserves, capital, but not built back into the operating budget. Other available funds, this is the sort of companion to the local receipts where the parking meter fund used to be in there, and now it's separate. I should say the municipal modernization law, which we're still evaluating because it was so expansive, provides a lot of relief to the town of Brookline. In this particular case, we used to have to separate our parking meter receipts into a fund, and we could only appropriate them if there was enough money in the fund at a particular time. So we go to town meeting in May, and the fiscal year isn't even over yet. So now what we're able to do is look at parking meter just like we look at that revenue, just like we look at other revenue, and we project it over the ensuing 12 months of the fiscal year, and the Department of Revenue allows us to incorporate that into our budget and our recap sheet. So that's what we're going to be doing next year, and that's why there's that difference in the accounting of those two categories. In this category, we also get reimbursement from our enterprises, our water, sewer, golf, and other self-supporting funds. This is where the money comes when we assess them for their share of pensions, health insurance, and other things. So this is where that money goes. I am very appreciative of the cemetery trustees who are providing an additional $25,000 from their trust fund for the operation and maintenance of the cemetery next year. And we also identified a former capital project of $148,000 that we're able to get back into the budget to support next year's capital budget.
Can I ask a question? The $25,000 comes out of the cemetery care and maintenance account?
Yes.
So, okay.
It's transferred to the town, and then we use it to help support the operating expenses of the cemetery.
So I assume that the remaining balance in there is sufficient to
it's a long-term
provide the purposes of
So there are two trust funds for cemeteries. There's an expendable trust and a non-expendable trust, and this is coming from the expendable trust. And the fund balance should support the annual transfer. Right now, they transfer $75,000, and the override study committee recommended increasing that to $100,000.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to expenditures now, and so here's the pie chart for expenditures, and this is really the pie chart I was referring to earlier, where you see the school department at 34.4%. You'll see later a graph that this is how we budget, but when we do an accounting and try to allocate all of the costs of the town into the various appropriate departments or programs, you'll see that number for the school department much greater. In fact, much greater. Over 50% of the town's tax dollar goes to the school department. But this is the budgeting, the budget part of the expenditure pie. Melissa will show you later when we are able to allocate all cost into it. So school budget up by 3.3%, and let me explain how that happens. You're aware of the town-school partnership, which is a general agreement that my predecessor and Andrew Bott's predecessor made, but we still continue to support it. In fact, we have a committee that the board has 2 members on, and the advisory committee, and the school committee, and so on, that continue to facilitate this partnership. So there is a formula, but the town-school partnership is even broader than that. It's really a more political statement of cooperation and working together to resolve issues and to reduce, hopefully, some of the controversy that exists in a lot of other communities to get to a starting point in the budget. So we use this formula. Basically, we take all of the changes in the revenues of the town. So if they go up or even if they go down, we share that 50-50 between the town departments and the school department. And then we layer on top of that some things that are unique. So we're dealing with school enrollment as a factor, we're dealing with special education as a factor, and we're dealing with the override funding. And so we overlay that on top of the formula. And the bottom line is, if for fiscal 2018, that results in a 3.3% increase in the school budget. And as I mentioned before, that includes that $770,430 of funds. Now, we're hoping to get that from other sources, but we didn't make our target, and so, but still, we're making that commitment. So we're continuing to fund the 3-year override plan for school enrollment, as was committed to in the beginning of the override. And I'm not going to talk about the school committee's budget. You'll have an opportunity to meet with them, and the school committee budget will be out. So that's about as much as I'll say on the school budget. On the municipal departments, we have some modest growth, which is essentially really to cover all the fixed costs and the contractual increases in our budget. This also, as part of this 1.7% increase, we also include a reserve for salary and wage increases for those union agreements or other obligations that we haven't resolved yet. So we keep a reserve in our budget. It's inclusive within that amount. So as I mentioned, it could be worse, but on the other hand, we're very pleased that we didn't have to do a reduction in our workforce or reduce some of the expenses associated, services and programs with that. But we do have a few limited investments in there. Pay-as-you-throw will be implemented at the end of this current fiscal year, but fiscal 18 will be the first full year of that operation. We have decided to put in some funds to have a special election in fiscal 18. Normally there's a state election in November we can piggyback on, but that's not the case in 2018. Or I should say, I guess it's November 2017, right? So we've put aside some money to hold a special election in anticipation that the board may call an election to deal with the school expansion, the night school as well as the high school expansion as a debt exclusion override. So that's in the budget. You are aware that we had a significant shortage in outside counsel funds, especially related to the HR and litigation there. We are looking at some of the reforms that I know this board has talked about, is looking at maybe consolidating some bringing more in-house work or doing more coordination with our town council as opposed to outside council. And we're looking at that very carefully. But in the meantime, we didn't want to go for another reserve transfer in fiscal 18, so we have put some funding aside for outside council expenses. Moving to non-departmental budget category, this is where our budget busters are. Group health insurance, pension, and OPEB liability. I mentioned before that we are assuming right now 5% composite rate increase for the GIC, although the final rates will be finalized in March. And we are looking at also accounting for potential new increased subscribers. If they are related to school, that is accounted for in the town school partnership formula. I know that's a question the advisory committee asks frequently. Pension funding, another budget buster. Our unfunded liability has increased. We had a new actuarial study looked at our overall unfunded liability. Unfortunately, it went up, resulting primarily from losses in the investment market in 2015, which is the period that this actuarial study is looking at. We also proactively, our own decision was we've moved down to 7.4% for our estimate, our assumption of a rate of return on our investments, our long-term investments in the pension fund. You may recall that it was up to 8.15%, and I'm sure we could have kept it there. I think there's actuarial methods to document that and allow that to be used, but we didn't think that that was appropriate. And so now, in a couple of steps, we're down now to 7.4%. And that had an impact on our actuarial analysis. So, unfortunately, we're going to have to increase our pension fund now by 7.85% per year, where previously we were closer to about 5%, 5.6% increase. So that's a tough one. We are putting $300,000 in free cash in there. That would have been worse had we not done that. Hopefully our next actuarial analysis will be better and we'll make up some of the losses in the market that we lost. And that 7.4% number for assumption of rate of return may be conservative and we'll be in a better shape. But right now, for the foreseeable future, we're going to start increasing our pension funding schedule by 7.85% per year.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Could I ask a question about that?
Of course.
Well, I guess you're going to move on to the OPEBs, and I don't see the difference in assumptions under OPEBs as I do in pension funding. So I'm just wondering whether we really need $600,000.
We are not even on a funding basis yet with our OPEBs, and so even though we'll have an actuarial analysis, we're not even at the point yet where we can begin a funding schedule. So we are really trying to put enough money in there to get to the point where we're even at the point where we can do a funding schedule.
There's something called the annual required contribution when you're on a 30-year funding schedule.
Right.
We are not up to the arc yet. So we're really trying to catch up with this.
What is that number?
What is the ARC? It's a lot more than that. I will tell you that. And so we're trying to build it up. I will tell you that we have about $30 million in our OPEB fund. That sounds like a lot until you understand that our liability is $280 million. So it's a very significant number. We're much more ahead of the game than most cities and towns, but still we have a long way to go. So we think, whenever we can prudently add money into the OPEB. We're already doing $250 as sort of our operating budget commitment, and then when we have free cash that would allow us to add more, we do it, and this was a year we could do that.
Well, it cycles back to the bond rating because Gatsby requires that you reflect the full value of that liability on your balance sheet. So any contribution we make today makes our balance sheet look better going forward.
Special appropriations on the expenditure side are essentially our capital budget. We are funding $9.58 million in fiscal 18, which reflects about 8.8% of our overall general fund revenue. Good number. 3.5 of that is coming from our general operating revenue, and $6 million from free cash. And as I said, it's a total of those two sources represent 8.8%. We did have to adjust our debt plan for the high school project because of it's happening sooner than we had initially thought, and we've decided that it wouldn't be in our interest to participate with MSBA. So Melissa will talk, when we get to the capital budget, a little bit about how we changed some of our estimates and strategy for funding the high school project in our capital budget. And the final expenditure category is non-appropriated enterprises. There are certain amounts of money that town meeting does not appropriate, but we still have to raise it and account for it, and so we include that in our annual budget, of course. What the state does for the MBTA assessment in the Norfolk County is just takes it off of our state aid, so there's really no need to appropriate it, but we have to account for that because we'll get a net state aid number that's the net of those amounts. Fortunately, we're only going up by 0.3% in this category, which I guess makes the Norfolk County assessment a little less difficult. But as you all know, the town is very dissatisfied with the value that we get from the county government services, given that we are the highest of all the participating counties in Norfolk County. Our assessment is higher than any of them, even the cities that are bigger than us, including Quincy. And it's based on equalized value, property value, so you can figure out why we are the highest. So that's a tough one. And
though if I recall, Norfolk County is going up 2.5%, but the MBTA went down, right?
Yeah. Good.
So now if Norfolk County went down too, would be our increase would be.
Yes, and
I still think we have a legal case that we in this county are paying for the retirement costs of employees in other counties that have dissolved, and we are paying for Norfolk counties. So I think that is unfair, and I think we should be pursuing a legal challenge to this assessment.
Yeah, and so far the town has pursued political, legislative strategies.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
And that has not worked. We'll never get out of the county because there are communities that benefit from us being in the county.
I think we need to file.
Well, I think Norfolk County is probably one of the better run county governments, and so the others like Middlesex and some of the ones in the western part of the state have been.
They've dissolved.
Yeah, they've dissolved because they were so poor. So that it's really unfair when you're trying to be the good doobie, and then you get slapped with.
It's ridiculous to me that our neighbors in Newton, which is Middlesex County, don't have to pay the county assessment, and we are paying through our state taxes for those liabilities of retirement costs for those employees that we also then so we're paying for theirs, and we're paying, a very high rate for our county employees. I think it's completely unfair, and I think we should be legally challenging it.
The other part of this group is enterprises, and it's a roughly modest growth of 1.1%. Most of that is in the MWRA assessment as far as the water sewer goes. I wanted to point out that Golf Enterprise has been really helped with the driving range, the new driving range at the facility. Golf is a very weather-intensive type of operation, and so anytime we can try to diversify the revenue, we try to do that, and we believe the driving range will be very helpful. A couple of years ago, you may recall that the town meeting we authorized a sick leave benefit for part-time employees. That hit the recreation department hard, and so it's things like the golf driving range, which we think will help a lot. And I think it's been a very good amenity for the whole town. A lot of people who don't golf will go and hit a bucket of balls and hang out at the golf course. So we're very pleased with that innovation.
I'm going to beat a dead horse. Norfolk County went up 9.9%. So I guess the value, the assessed value of our property is increasing faster than South Shore, the South Shore communities in Norfolk County.
Yeah, so that hurts. So
Wow.
when you look at it, it included in the overall category, it's a 0.3% increase, but I can assure you, the advisory committee also made that observation.
I know.
And I think are looking to ratchet up, so I'm sure there probably will be discussion, Nancy, of the legal merits of.
Well, do we know of any other municipalities who have an interest in pursuing legal remedies?
Well, we did do that survey of communities, and I would say we're very lukewarm. I would tell you, most communities benefit from having Brookline part of the county, so they would not.
Yeah, we're paying for them. They should.
We're
they love it.
subsidizing there. Now, there were a couple of communities that my colleagues told me they would be part of that, but, they have to get their support of their, their board or their city council, and so I don't think so, Nancy. I don't think that's going to be the strategy that's going to solve this.
And I think we have submitted home rule petitions to withdraw from Norfolk County, but those have
That went nowhere.
That went nowhere, exactly.
The same
But
reason.
maybe we should keep doing it because.
No, but I think the legal challenge to the unfair taxation thing, that why are we paying through our state taxes for Middlesex and also, and all the other ones that have dissolved, and also paying for Norfolk? I think that's.
Well, perhaps the fault
unfair.
is at the state level because the state should probably reimburse Brookline and other cities and towns that are involved in a solvent county to the same extent that they pay now for the counties that have dissolved, like Middlesex. So, I think maybe that's the fault, is that we're getting a bum rap from the state because they're devoting county resources or resources to counties that no longer exist and not giving us resources to help us with county expenses.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a legitimate argument. I think, unfortunately, given the state of the state budget, it's not likely that there's any progress that we'll make in that area.
Sorry about beating that dead
No, I think it is one. You point out, Neil, that I think this is the year where they did the reassessment of the valuation, and that is not a great increase for us. What's the total amount? Is that like almost $1 million now, right?
It's $948,000. A lot of money.
That's tough. When you think about what we're getting for a benefit.
And what we could be doing with it.
We're physically non-contiguous to any other Norfolk County municipality, so it's not like we have the benefit of using some of the county facilities on the South Shore.
Yeah, it's also a size issue. So some of the smaller communities in the county are dependent upon county services for engineering, for surveying, for purchasing, and for better or for worse, we are such a large organization that we have those services in-house. We have our own purchasing agent. We have an engineering department that is capable of handling everything that we need to do in town, and that's just not the case for the community of Norfolk, for other smaller Norfolk County communities.
Well, and in addition, there's a golf course. There's the agricultural college, which I believe high school, which we have one student at. Had. And in the many years I've been on this board, that one student was the only one I know of that has gone to the agricultural high school. So we could have paid the tuition.
A lot of times over.
Yes. So, I really do think this has gotten ridiculous, and we need to, and I don't think, because it's in everyone else's interest to make us just pay for this stuff we don't use. Yeah. I don't think anybody's going to let us off the hook. That's why I'm suggesting we file a lawsuit.
Have we ever tried the tact of saying to the county, okay, you pay for engineering services for all these cities and towns, where's our share? Because if they're giving, Norfolk is giving, I don't even know, giving Dedham X amount in engineering services, why aren't we getting?
Well, I think we actually do. They're very limited, but, every now and then we'll send out a survey job to the county, I believe. So I think we do try to take advantage of some of the services. I'll verify that, but I remember once asking Peter Ditto is if there's, if we're going to contract for a survey, why not use the county? And I think we've done that on occasion.
Yeah, I think we've done it, but we don't get $900,000.
Yeah, there's only a limited
benefit.
amount. I mean, it's not an open-ended, they're not going to fund your engineering department.
Right.
But as Ben pointed out, for small communities, they don't need much, and they can get what they need from the county.
Well,
okay, I'm going to move on to the next section, which is the policy issues and initiatives. I feel very strongly that the budget is not just a document of numbers. It really should relate to overall issues that we're dealing with. And I want to highlight a few that I've been dealing with, I know this board has been dealing with, that have implications in on the budget. Land use and Chapter 40B developments. I don't have to tell you, this board, you've been very active, proactive in this issue, but nonetheless, we have been dealing with 12 separate proposals that would add over 1,000 units of housing. They're called 40B, which are affordable housing, but as you well know, that's the big secret of 40B. They're mostly market rate developments. And so these will have significant budget implications on us. Many of these units will be occupied by school-age students, and we'll have to deal with the funding of their education. And just the strain on the town resources, primarily our planning and building staff, our volunteer zoning board of appeals, don't do much else than deal with 40B developments. And because if you don't act on them in a timely manner, they will be automatically approved. We just cannot do that. So that's why we've been so aggressive in working with the HCD to give us a little bit of relief. But this is the continuing issue that we're dealing with. And it's too bad because we have some very good market rate or regular economic development initiatives that we're working on. I know Mr. Franco was involved in the one was just authorized, but we could do a lot more, I think, if we didn't have to deal with this mandate of the 40Bs. But that's where we're at. I just want to mention that that's a major issue in the budget. The uncertain federal landscape is one that not only you but everyone in this country is sort of wondering what's next. We're dealing with our sanctuary city status, and our president has already indicated that communities that are sanctuary cities, and the devil's, of course, is in the details about what that really means, will have its funding taken away. Whether that happens legally or politically is a question, but it's still a question mark. And so we really are worried about our community development block grant formula. We're a formula community because of our size. We get direct federal aid of about $1.6 million, is it? $1.4 million or $1.5 million from HUD directly through the federal government. We also get a lot of federal education aid directly, Title I, Title III, and also some special education funding. And then when you combine those with other indirect federal money that comes through the state agencies, we're talking over $6 million. I think we talked about that a couple weeks ago. We're talking about the sanctuary city issue.
Can I add something there?
Yes.
I think that's the reason why we should be very careful about how we label ourselves. I mean, the statement that the board put out last week really talked about substance, not labels. And I think we should give some thought to whether we want to even use the term sanctuary city. It has no real meaning except in the mind of the guy in the White House. And the meaning he attributes to it is something different than what I think we want to be subject to. So I think that's just something we need to think about in terms of how we characterize, our stance towards the human beings that appear at our doorstep, and that we want to make sure that we place a welcome mat out for.
Well said. We continue to be worried about the tax exempt status of municipal bonds, which is so critical to our ability to afford these major projects, especially for us going into a major school construction. You know that last week I was not here. I was attending as part of my responsibilities with MMA, an event that the National League of Cities sponsored down in Washington, where we met with a representative of the administration, as well as some federal agencies and our congressional delegation. And I will tell you, I've never seen Washington so uncertain and panicked in some ways about just no one knows what's next. No one knows what's up. It's a very unsettling time, and we're feeling that too, and our Commonwealth is. So just pointing out, we don't have anything specifically in the budget that I think reflects any of these issues, but we're very wary of them, and I want to mention those. Trash collection and hybrid pay-as-you-throw. Fiscal 18 will be the first year of that program. One of those areas when we looked at the non-tax part of the override plan that we were hoping to, or at least the override study committee recommended that we would do, would be increasing the fee to cover the subsidy that the town provides to its solid waste operations. We did not feel comfortable doing that in fiscal 18 because we got really a year late start on implementing this. So we're going to wait for a full year of operation to see, who picked the bins and what our trash, tonnage is and so on before we make any other recommendations on that. But we're going to be very focused on implementation over the next year. Diversity inclusion, which is a major priority of this town, especially in attracting a more diverse group to our management ranks, is something that's always on my mind. And there's two small areas that we're going to deal with in this budget, fiscal 18. One is to acquire an applicant tracking package. Part of our problem has been, we don't really have a great way of creating data from which to evaluate our performance with our applicants. And so this is a small expenditure, but nonetheless something that we hope will help us get a better handle on how we're doing. We're also looking at studying the management, classification, and compensation. We're very concerned that our system does not provide any barriers for minorities, for women, and creates equity in that classification and compensation. So we'll be studying that particular group of our employees next year. I wanted to mention some shifting in the IT. You'll hear more from Kevin Stokes when he comes, but you're really seeing a shift in the way information technology is funded. We're no longer buying a lot of equipment and servers to keep information, but we're using web-based. We're using the web as a way to do our applications and store our data. And so you're seeing a shift from acquisition to more fee-based services, and Kevin will talk a little bit about that. The other thing you're seeing is a lot of focus on social media and getting the message out through email and other social media applications. And as a result, we are reorganizing a position in the IT called the Business Administrative Manager, whose job will be really to focus on that area and really work with the departments, not let the departments figure it out themselves, because they won't, but work with them so that we can do a lot more in the social media arena. So that's another policy area of interest. Performance management is one of my personal commitments. I believe strongly that more empirical analysis of what we do will contribute to better decisions and better performance. And last year's budget, we talked about training, and I'm really pleased that we did our training. We had a very extensive one-day training at, was it Pine Manor, that we were able to get off-site and bring not only our department heads, but the next level of mid-management personnel, and we had GFOA do our training. And one of the things we realized is, departments really rely on each other, and we need to do more sort of town-wide goal setting on areas. Diversity inclusion is one of those. We spent some time in our training talking about and how to develop better measures to meet those goals. So performance management continues to be a major focus of mine in our departments, and I think you'll see that when you meet with departments. They're really trying harder to measure things that are just better, more than just how many potholes we fill, but more relevant data that will help us make better decisions and do a better job at what we do. School expansion continues to be a huge issue. This board is very involved in it, obviously, when talking about dealing with the siting issues of the ninth school over the last couple of years, and now working in the building committees where two of our board members are co-chairing those committees. But in addition to the capital, we're really need to shift our focus on how are we going to fund after our 3-year override plan. Now, we hope that the 3-year override plan could last longer, but we're not sure. But we really need to begin to evaluate that. And I'm heartened by the advisory committee's effort to establish a long-range planning subcommittee that we've already begun to sit and talk with, to really identify is, how long could we go? Could we go another year? Could we go another couple of years? And if so, what would be the impacts on our school services, our town services, so that this board can make decisions? And whether we establish a new override study committee yet or not, I don't know. But at least we're going to start having that dialogue with the advisory committee and try to figure out how we should proceed after fiscal 18. I wanted to focus on some of the town-wide obligations. I already talked about 40Bs and school expansion that are really dominating all of our efforts, all departments really. It's really impacting many departments you wouldn't think about, but both of those really do impact. But I want to also mention sort of the cumulative impact of some of the town meeting activity we've seen in recent years. Now, we call them non-binding resolutions, but I think we all would agree that they're very important to this town, these resolutions of town meeting, and we really try to implement them in the spirit that town meeting expected. But there's a limit, and there's a cumulative impact of these, especially dealing in the health department, enforcement of those environmental regulations that we've enacted, the building department, for leaf blowers and police department and so on. And so I'm just pointing it out. I don't want to sound like we're complaining, but on the other hand, in an environment where we're not really increasing any staff capacity whatsoever, we're feeling the cumulative impacts of some of these town meeting actions, and that's about as much as I would say. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to begin talking about some of the longer-term financial issues, getting into some more of the details on the capital. But before I move on, I also want to acknowledge Mike DePietro, who's here, our town accountant, our auditor, and he will be available for questions and answers when we finish. Controller. Some people call it accountant, auditor. We call it the controller. I should know that. But before we move on to Melissa, is there any other questions that I could take? I will be available afterwards as well. All right, so in that case, I'll move on to Melissa's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to acknowledge Austin. Putting this budget together takes a lot of work. It's a lot of grunt work. It's a lot of numbers. He's also been helping on the first floor with our treasury staff as well. And then, to add on to everything else, we also decided to throw a couple blizzards in there during our document production phase. So it definitely was a challenge, and I really thank Austin for his efforts. So I'll just jump right in here. This is our overall financial plan, and so it just shows the various funds where the revenue's coming from, whether it be our general fund or the cemetery trust that we talked about earlier, and then the category of expenditures where all that revenue goes as well. So this is the slide that we talk a lot about in advisory committee, where we try and show what a fully allocated school budget looks like. So in addition to education, the line item for schools, we take things that are school-related, like benefits for school employees, building services that support the school department, and we try and allocate those to the school department to show really what the actual budget would look like. This is a summary of our general fund budget, so we can see that the revenue is growing by 4.5%, and then when we make adjustments for our non-appropriated items, we actually have an amount available of $11,796,000, and then you can see the various categories of appropriations where that revenue is going. So you can see the school growth of 3.3%, the town growth of 1.7%, and our CIP growth of 9.5%. So I use this chart. I pulled out parking meter receipts so that you could actually see where the growth was in local receipts. And you can see that the motor vehicle excise tax, local option taxes, building permits, and the refuse fee are definitely growth categories for us. Last year, we had talked about the Medicare Part D subsidy starting to go away, so I'm showing a reduction of $200,000. That's normally a $400,000 line item as well. We should be seeing, instead of the subsidy coming in, we're supposed to be seeing lower rates, so we'll see if that bears out when we get our GIC rates in March. I know.
Dream on.
This is the sequencing of free cash, so it shows you the starting point from when we get our certification, and then the per our fiscal policies and the priorities for the town, how we allocate our free cash. So right off the bat, 25% of our budget reserve goes, part of that is free cash. We already talked about our designated fund balance. Our liability fund has a target of 1% of prior year net revenue, so to meet that requirement, it's a $203,000 appropriation. The 6% policy of CIP adds on to it free cash to try and get to 7.5%. And then if there's any available balance left on there, there's an allocation to the Housing Trust Fund. And then after all of those priorities are satisfied, if there's still a balance, we can either revisit any of the buckets above, or if there are other long-term liabilities, we can appropriate free cash for that. So in this case, not only are we able to revisit the CIP and help us get to 8.8%, we're recommending additional free cash go to OPEBs and the pension fund in order to try and mitigate some of these really massive increases that we're seeing in the liabilities. This is a slide that just shows the change in fund balance over the years. When we saw this decline here out in 2010, this was when we were starting to get warnings from our ratings agency about the decline in fund balance and trying to address that. So the decline that you see in 2015 was actually storm related, because we really did use a big chunk of our reserve fund and our overlay to try and address our snow deficit. But we've been able to kind of rebound in 2016.
What happened in 10, if you can
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'll have to look into that.
Yeah. Okay, keep going.
It's been a while. So this just shows you the expenditure growth, where you can see that benefits is our biggest growth item, and then followed behind there is the schools. And then after that is town departments, and the free cash supported CIP as well. So while Mel was talking, I did look up our more information on our OPEB. So if we assume the same rate of return that we're assuming for the pension fund, 7.4%, our annual required contribution would be $20,434,000. So we would be, based on what we currently pay for benefits, we'd be $8,952,000 short on our ARC. So it's pretty massive. When looking at this chart last year, we were pretty close to reaching the ARC based on the old funding schedule. So there's definitely, I feel like that provides the justification to appropriate free cash, the $600,000 to that line item as well. And you can see some of the other, didn't need to go back. Other funding sources that we allocate in addition to the $250,000 annually. We were using Medicare Part D subsidy that we were getting. We assess our special revenue funds. And then we take any savings from a conversion of the non-contributory retirement system into the OPEB fund as well.
I want to take this opportunity, though, since I won't be here next year and subsequent years, to remind everyone that the OPEB Study Committee has recommended that when we finally are fully funded in the pension fund, that rather than using that money that we no longer have to put in pensions for operating, that funding would move over to the OPEB thing. So want that to get into everybody's heads. So
Right, and I won't be here when that happens.
So that's in 2030. Thanks for the transition to my next slide.
Selectman Franco might be.
So you can see what Nancy's talking about is this is our pension funding schedule, which brings us to our fully funding date, flipping around, to 2030. So the big drop in here, what Nancy is suggesting is that, the change in the funding plan would then be allocated to the OPEB fund, and that would probably provide somewhere around $48 million to that fund, which would be really helpful in terms of trying to get that fund to full funding as well. So you can see, the rate of return assumptions that Mel talked about earlier, and then we are also recommending $300,000 of free cash for that as well. So this is just a quick little snapshot of the overall budget picture, where you can see our revenue categories and then how the expenditure categories line up against that. Just another way to kind of quantify the growth in the budget. And this is specifically town growth in the budget, so you can see some of the personnel obligations like collective bargaining and steps. The growth in the HR budget is related to the outside counsel that we had talked about before for legal services, the applicant tracking. Town clerk, although we are including the election that Mel referenced earlier, if fiscal 17 there were 3 elections, so there is a slight reduction there for having one less election. And then there is some modest savings in utilities as well. So this just shows the enterprise funds and the overall picture for water and sewer. The MWRA assessments pretty much drive the growth in this budget. The golf course, this is just the overall picture of the golf course, where you can see this growth of $185,000 in other revenue is specifically related to the driving range. They're having a really good experience there, and they hope to continue to kind of promote and grow that program as well. The recreation.
Now, you might want to show that as something other than other.
Yeah, probably. So the recreation revolving fund, I was saying to the advisory committee that they're experiencing a similar, I wouldn't say problem, but funding issue when it comes to the enrollment growth that the schools are facing. That's the same constituency that the recreation department has, so they're needing to grow their programs to meet the demand. So now we're transitioning on to our capital improvement program. So we've got $115.8 million over the next 6 years. We already had our preliminary discussion of CIP, where we talked about that we do have funding for both the ninth school and high school, the schematic design. And a debt exclusion is going to be assumed for the ninth school at Baldwin and the Sewell Field Park project, and for a portion of the high school project. Now, advisory committee asked me why I put the ninth school Sewell Field on the debt exclusion, and why didn't I do that with Cypress Field? Because Cypress Field is still in with town funds for CIP. I said, well, that's a good point. I said, I've only had one meeting where we've talked about the CIP, so that's something that, I'm sure, as we continue through the process will be debated. But it was kind of interesting to get that feedback from them. So the current funding plan is 8.8%. Sorry, go ahead.
You say debt exclusions will be required for the remaining ninth school at Baldwin.
Yep.
Including improvements to Sewell Field and for a portion of any BHS project.
Correct.
So is that what you mean in terms of, what do you mean by portion?
So right now the way the funding is that we have schematic design program for both projects.
Right.
Beyond that, there is no other funds allocated in the CIP for the ninth school at Baldwin, but there's $35 million plus $2.2 million for Cypress Field, which is in the CIP right now reflected as a separate project, but on the same timeline as the high school.
Okay.
This is just an overall funding summary of the CIP. So you can see the portion of funding which is debt financed compared to revenue finance. It's also in our budget book as well. These are some of the major projects that are coming through our CIP. The two school projects being kind of the most heavily dominant, but we also have an exciting Coolidge Corner improvement project. Last year we talked about the trustees and their feasibility study and looking to try and see if there would be a new location for the Coolidge Corner Library. I think
That's
that
the Coolidge Corner Library.
Correct.
Improvements.
Correct.
You might want to relabel that.
Yep. So the trustees have kind of taken a step back and rethought that plan, and they want to proceed with the original project that was planned in terms of improving HVAC, some ADA requirements, and some just basic repairs and refreshment of the building. So that building will be closed for approximately 6 months, probably in the latter half of the fiscal year. And Sarah will talk more about that when she comes for her budget review as well. This is our overall forecast, revenue expenditures. I know it's very hard to kind of read all the numbers there, but we're going to be posting this online for people who are interested in looking. And where you can see is that, we're balanced in 18 and 19. For the town isn't as big of an issue, at least with the current assumptions for group health, the way that we have them right now, but the schools definitely are starting to face a problem in 19 that's going to be growing as we go into the fiscal year, the next fiscal year. So I think this is one of the things that is going to be talked about pretty robustly with the school committee, with the advisory committee. And then I will go back to the slide that Mel had talked about earlier, just so we can kind of go through the 770, because that will be my last slide, that he had talked about at the beginning of the presentation. So we can see, some of the things that we had projected and we weren't meeting our target. We already know that the pay-as-you-throw program has been delayed by a year. So that's why there's a shortfall there. The library materials and fines, so it was projected that the library would be able to be more aggressive with their collection. State law changed that doesn't allow libraries to hire collections agencies anymore, so that's why we're falling short in that revenue item. We already talked about the cemeteries fees and their ability to meet that as well. The school child care rates, there was a desire to shift more costs from the general fund onto the revolving fund and using the fee structure in order to be able to absorb that. Unfortunately, there were some changes in policy around earned sick time that prevented the revolving fund from being able to handle a shift like that.
I think we should say, though, that was the override study committee that was interested in doing that. And I think there was great skepticism from everyone else, because they were actually going to make this program, which is a town-run program, like as expensive or more expensive than many privately run programs. So I personally never thought that one was in any way realistic, but it was the override study committee. I don't think we can say it was a goal of this board or anybody but the override study committee.
Yeah, I think the point of this slide is basically to say that, 3 years out, it's hard to project what's going to happen in the future, but we're still honoring the commitment to provide that level of support to the school department. And that is the end of the presentation that I have. I'll just leave you with the last slide that basically shows kind of the structural gap that we face annually, and especially with the school enrollment growth really does widen that gap, and it doesn't seem to be abating anytime soon. So.
Can you just finish that previous thought? Why did we fall short on the online credit card charges for motor vehicle excise tax?
So I think part of it is that the lack of a finance director. I really feel like that is something that I don't want to put that burden on the Treasury staff currently, and I really want a new finance director to come in, look at this comprehensively, and then bring a policy for the board to vote on.
I'd like to raise an issue. At town meeting a couple years ago, there was a appointment of a committee to look at the issue of bottled water. I looked through here very, quickly skimmed through the CIP portion of this document, and I don't really see any specific mention of water projects that we had talked about, and that the committee actually asked various town departments to begin working on. It may be buried in there under different names, but I think it would be important to
Quantify it.
put those projects somewhat in a highlighted state, so that people know that that we responded to the concerns of the populace as expressed in town meeting, and have addressed some of the issues of providing access to town water for people as an alternative to bottled water.
I know that some of the escalation that I saw in some of the park and open space project costs were related to water infrastructure, but I'll make sure when Erin is in front of this board for her budget review that she highlights that.
I would also mention, I know, Bernard, that we were interested in one of those portable water units that I think we observed and took advantage of at the Fisher Hill Park opening. And in fact, the DPW is acquiring that unit, for a unit like that for ourselves, which will be mobile and can be brought around to various park facilities and so on. So, but you're right, we didn't really sort of talk about that particular policy, and we'll make sure we do that during the departmental budget reviews.
I'm wondering about the issue of, in our public hearings, when we review warrant articles, whether we are doing, we're asking enough questions about what is this going to cost. And I'm thinking, I know I did the polystyrene warrant article so many years ago when I wasn't on this board, and went through 1 million public hearings, and I don't think anybody asked me, and not that I would have known how much it would have cost, but I think perhaps that should be a step in there somewhere of what is it going to cost the town if we pass this, just so the town meeting will know and can understand why we need to expand the health department inspectional staff, or DPW, permitting, or whatever, but building department especially. But I think I'm wondering whether that's something we should attempt consciously.
Well, I was suggesting with one of those recently, or suggesting to somebody, I can't remember who I had the conversation with, that we might have to go more toward it. If people want things like that, want town meeting to pass it, and we might have to go more toward a system where there was some initial educational efforts to who's ever impacted, and then it would be a complaint-driven system. So we would have to call upon the public to, rather than being able to send inspectors out to inspect for more and more things, that it would have to be a system where, the public would have to be watching for that and notify the town, and we would respond to complaints, but not necessarily be able to send inspectors out on umpteen different things.
We talked a lot about this internally amongst ourselves, and in fact, in the budget document, you'll see we do address it to some extent, but we were very wary of wanting to, be perceived as complaining about town meeting, because, we're very committed to the town meeting process and the ability of grassroots decisions or issues coming up. But a couple of things I would point out. Number one, we refer to these as non-binding resolutions, but, I think we should be honest with ourselves and say that, they're viewed as binding, and so if they are going to be viewed as binding, I think we do need to ask tough questions. But it often is difficult because, they're done serially. Doing one, we say, well, incrementally, that's not really going to be that big of a deal. But after several years and cumulative, the impacts, they do add up. So I don't have a good answer, Nancy, but I do think that there ought to be a different don't know, vigilance about looking at some of the cost and some of the factors about some of these, and not just sort of saying, well, it's non-binding, I'm sure it'll work out, or whatever, or,
But a lot of them are warrant articles, and they are binding. So,
well, some of them are, you're right, they're bylaw
So,
proposals,
I-
and those clearly should, we should be more rigorous. I think the advisory committee has some, will also weigh in on that, I think.
And I really, I do believe that in terms of climate action, we need, as a town, to be able to have the resources to deal with some of the things that are coming forward. But, I think that some of them can be accomplished in other ways that won't cost the town as much, and we should pursue those.
Yes.
I want to talk about receipts for a second, the happier side of the budget. I noticed that lodging and meals tax local option revenue is going to go up by 6.3%. It seems like we've had a lot of proposals for new hotels. And I'm wondering if we've thought a little bit about occupancy rates and whether that's going to get tweaked at all.
So I have an annual exercise with Gary McCabe and Kara Bruton where we talk about the projections for new growth, but in addition to that, we talk about hotel, motel, and try and put an estimate in the long-range plan for what we think we'll be able to get for those taxes as well.
And has that number, the occupancy rate number, been tweaked at all, or do we think it's going to stay constant over the next couple of fiscal years?
I have, it's pretty constant over the next few fiscal years, but I'll provide you with the growth assumptions that I have for some of these new projects that are coming online, like 25 Washington Street. I think we might even have some assumptions in there around the Holiday Inn project as well.
Yeah, I believe this topic has come up in the Holiday Inn Waldo Durgan discussions, and one thing I learned is that the assessor's assumptions with respect to the existing hotels and the hotels that are under permitting are fairly conservative. But also, I think folks are starting to ask the question, does the market have the capacity to create, this number of new rooms that are being proposed and sustain that? And that's going to be one of the things we'll be testing.
So, Mike, that's a valid question. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, are we being conscious about holding the number constant going forward, or are we saying, well, we now have 7 hotels in town, we're just not going to get 80% occupancy rate, and therefore the value of the property is less than what we might have assessed it for.
The
5 years
value
previously.
For property taxation?
Property taxation,
Yeah.
and then also the amount we would derive in local option taxes per room.
So far, I don't think we've really done that critical analysis. I think Gary probably thinks about that a lot in terms of the property value, and I'm sure he'll be able to answer that question better when that comes up.
Any other questions?
No, I just want to say thank you.
Yeah.
As always, it's very comprehensive and lots of good information. I know so much hard work goes into this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll second that, I'll third that.
Okay, well, we look forward to getting departments in front of you and diving into the details over the next several weeks and working with the advisory committee and getting to town meeting before we know it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
And I think that concludes our business for tonight. Thank you.